Hello and welcome. You've arrived at a place where nothing is required of you. There is no task waiting, no expectation to meet, no need to stay alert or engaged. Whatever brought you here can begin to soften now, slowly, without effort. The day does not need to be carried any further. You don't have to resolve it, replay it, or hold it together. This is simply a quiet moment where you are allowed to rest exactly as you are. You can let your body settle into the surface beneath you, noticing how it supports you without asking anything in return. There is no need to adjust or improve your position unless you feel like it. Even then, movement can be slow and minimal, just enough to become comfortable before stillness returns on its own. The surface beneath you is steady, patient, and capable of holding your weight for as long as you need. Your breathing can begin to slow naturally. There is no need to control it or follow a pattern. Each breath knows where to go. Air enters, air leaves, and the space between breaths can gently widen. With every exhale, you may notice a small release, as if something you were holding without realizing it is no longer necessary. The body understands how to rest when nothing is demanding its attention. Sounds around you do not need to disappear. They can remain where they are, distant and unimportant. You don't need to identify them or react to them. They can exist in the background, blending into the quiet rather than interrupting it. Even silence does not need to be complete. This moment does not require perfection. Thoughts may still appear, and that's fine. They don't need to be stopped or followed. They can drift through slowly, like shapes moving far away, without pulling you with them. There is no need to solve anything right now. No need to plan ahead or look back. If a thought comes, it can simply pass, leaving space behind it. Tonight, there's nowhere you need to go. Nothing you need to stay awake for. Time does not need to be tracked. Minutes do not need to be counted. This is not a moment you can miss. You are already here, and that is enough. As you continue to rest, you may notice that your body grows heavier, not in an uncomfortable way, but in a grounding, settling way. Muscles that were holding tension without reason can begin to let go. The face softens, the jaw loosens, the shoulders sink slightly, as if they no longer need to carry anything. There is no rush to move forward. We are not going anywhere quickly. Everything unfolds slowly here, at a pace that allows your attention to loosen and drift. You don't need to prepare for what comes next. You don't need to listen closely, even if you fall asleep at any moment. That is exactly what this space is for. For now, just remain where you are. Let the outside world fade a little further into the distance. Let the quiet become familiar. Let yourself arrive fully, knowing that nothing will be asked of you, and nothing needs to be held together anymore. Everything else can wait. As we begin to drift a little further, there is still no need to move quickly or follow anything closely. This moment is only about orientation, about allowing the idea of the ocean at night to exist gently in the background, without requiring a clear image or a defined scene. You don't need to picture waves or horizons unless you want to. You can simply sense the presence of something vast, slow, and calm, stretching far beyond the edges of attention. And before we go any deeper, if these quiet journeys help you rest, you're welcome to like the video or subscribe to the channel. It helps this calm space reach others who need it too. There's no rush, and you don't need to do anything now. You can always return to it another time. Now, you can let that thought fade on its own, without holding on to it. Nothing here needs to be remembered. The ocean does not ask for attention, and neither does this moment. It simply exists, steady and patient, moving at a pace that allows the mind to loosen its grip naturally. At night, the ocean changes its character, not dramatically, not suddenly, but subtly. The surface quiets, reflections soften, Movement becomes less about waves breaking and more about slow, rolling motion that continues, whether it is observed or not. The water does not rush to meet the shore. It arrives gently, withdraws gently, and repeats this motion without concern for time. You can imagine yourself near the surface, not floating actively, not swimming, just being held by the idea of water beneath you. There's no effort required to stay where you are. The ocean supports without gripping, carries without pulling, allowing everything above it to rest. This sense of support does not need to be tested. It is simply there. Sound behaves differently at night as well. The sharper edges disappear. What remains is a low, ambient presence, a kind of background rhythm that does not demand interpretation. You don't need to identify it as waves or wind. It can remain abstract, like a distant hum that blends into the quiet. The horizon is no longer something to look toward. In the dark, distance loses meaning. The ocean stretches outward, but without a visible boundary, without a line separating near from far. This absence of edges allows attention to relax. When there is nothing to focus on, the mind no longer needs to search. Time near the ocean at night feels different too. It does not move in noticeable steps. Moments do not announce themselves. The passing of time becomes a smooth, continuous flow, similar to breathing, something that happens without being counted. You don't need to know how long you've been here. The ocean does not keep track, and neither do you. As this orientation settles in, your body can continue to soften. There is no need to match the rhythm of the ocean. Your breathing will find its own pace. Muscles can remain heavy and loose. Awareness can drift slightly, like a slow current moving beneath the surface of thought. Nothing is about to happen. Nothing needs to begin. This is simply the gentle act of settling into a larger space, one that does not require effort, focus, or response. The ocean remains steady and wide, and you are free to rest within that presence as everything continues to slow. There is no single moment when you begin to go deeper, because the ocean does not ask you to begin anything, and it does not mark transitions with sharp edges or sudden changes. The surface simply becomes less important, less present, less able to hold your attention. The way a distant sound becomes background when you stop reaching for it, and the way a thought becomes faint when you no longer try to complete it. The descent is not a decision. It is a soft loosening, a gradual surrender to a space that does not require effort, a space that carries you without asking you to participate. At first, it feels like nothing is happening, and that is exactly the point. Because deep water does not behave like a place where events are supposed to happen. It behaves like a place where continuation is enough, where the only motion is the slow persistence of what already exists, where time spreads outward like a calm fabric rather than ticking forward like a metronome. You do not need to know how far you are from the surface, and you do not need to picture where you are going, because the ocean does not offer a destination. It offers a condition. A wide, steady condition that remains, whether you track it or forget it. Light is the first thing to soften, not because it disappears abruptly, but because it becomes scattered, diluted, filtered through layers of water that do not care about visibility. Any reflection you might have imagined above becomes a faint idea, and then an even fainter idea, until it is no longer useful to the mind. Shapes lose definition. Edges blur. Contrast fades. It becomes harder to insist on clarity, and easier to accept the gentle, featureless quiet that depth naturally provides. You may notice that your thoughts respond the same way, becoming softer around their borders, less urgent, less sharp, less interested in being solved. Sound behaves the same way. Near the surface, the world has crispness. Even the smallest variations can feel like signals. But as depth increases, variation dissolves. Sound is absorbed and spread. It becomes less like a message and more like a low, uniform presence, like distance itself, like the soft remainder of motion that no longer matters. You do not need to listen for anything. There's nothing to catch. There's nothing to interpret. The ocean does not speak in events down here. It speaks in steadiness. The water around you grows denser in the imagination, not in a way that presses sharply, not in a way that demands attention, but in a way that surrounds evenly, like a quiet weight distributed in every direction. The sense of being held becomes more complete. Gravity feels less like pulling and more like simply existing. There is no need to balance. There is no need to brace. There is no posture to maintain. The body can begin to trust that it is already supported, already carried, already allowed to stop trying. This is what makes the ocean at night such an easy place for the mind to drift, because it does not offer bright markers. It does not offer obvious turns. It does not offer a reason to stay alert. It offers a slow, stable continuation that teaches the nervous system, without words, that nothing is about to happen that requires a response. When the body senses that, it begins to release. The jaw loosens. The face softens. The shoulders settle. Even the small, habitual tension that stays in the muscles when you are awake can begin to drain away. Not all at once, but gradually. Like warmth leaving stone after sunset, slow enough that you don't need to notice it for it to happen. The descent continues without needing to be tracked. It continues as a quiet reduction of detail, a gentle thinning of signals, a soft widening of space. The ocean becomes more uniform, and uniformity is soothing because it removes decision. When everything is similar, there is nothing to choose. When everything is steady, there is nothing to monitor. When everything is slow, there is nothing to anticipate. The mind can stop scanning the future. It can stop replaying the past. It can rest inside the present. And even the present begins to feel less like a point and more like a wide field. You might notice how this changes your sense of time. It becomes difficult to measure. Minutes lose their shape. There is no clear boundary between one moment and the next. Time begins to behave like the ocean behaves, moving without punctuation, continuing without urgency. You do not need to know how long you have been listening. You do not need to know where you are in the narration. You are not behind. You are not late. Nothing needs to be completed. This is not a sequence you have to follow. It is a slow drift you are allowed to forget. If thoughts arise, they can rise like small bubbles in the dark, and then drift away before you can name them. They do not need to become stories. They do not need to become plans. They do not need to become conclusions. They can appear, soften, and dissolve, leaving behind the same calm space they entered. The ocean does not hold on to anything tightly. It receives and releases. It absorbs and continues. You can do the same with the mind, not by forcing it, but by letting it see that it no longer has to grip. Depth is not a place where the mind has to work. Depth is where the mind can stop working without fear, because fear depends on sharpness. It depends on contrast. It depends on sudden change. And here, in the slow descent, sharpness fades, contrast fades. Sudden change becomes unlikely. Everything that remains is gentle and evenly distributed. It becomes easier to trust the environment. And when you trust the environment, your body stops preparing, stops bracing, stops holding tension as a precaution. You do not need to imagine your body moving downward. You can imagine the world above becoming less present instead, as if distance is increasing without motion, as if you are simply becoming more insulated from the surface, more wrapped and quiet. The ocean does not require you to travel. It simply offers layers, and each layer reduces stimulus a little more. softens sensation a little more, spreads time a little wider. The descent becomes less like movement and more like deepening, like settling into a thicker, calmer version of the same space. Sometimes, it can help to think of depth as a kind of blanket, not a blanket that covers from above, but one that surrounds from all directions, a steady, even presence that has no sharp seams. This surrounding presence does not squeeze, it does not trap, it does not confine. It simply holds the way water holds, supporting without gripping, carrying without pulling. The deeper you go, the more complete that holding becomes, until there is no need to resist anything, because there is nothing to resist. The ocean at night is already calm at the surface, but as you go deeper, calm becomes more than a mood. It becomes structure. It becomes physics. It becomes inevitability. The deep ocean is stable in a way that feels almost impossible from the perspective of daily life. Because daily life is full of abruptness and signals and decisions, the deep ocean is full of patience. It is full of smooth continuation. It is full of the kind of quiet that does not demand attention. It is the opposite of urgency, and urgency cannot survive here. As the descent continues, you may notice that even the idea of down becomes less meaningful. Direction fades. Up and down begin to feel like concepts the mind uses when it needs to orient itself. And here, orientation is unnecessary. There is nothing to navigate. There is nothing to avoid. There is nothing to approach. There is only depth, and depth spreads in every direction like a dim, gentle vastness. In that vastness, direction is not required, and without direction, the mind has less to do. The water's temperature changes slowly in layers, and you do not need to know the numbers or the science of it. You only need the feeling that everything here changes gradually, never abruptly. Even change is slow. Even difference is softened. You can imagine the water becoming slightly cooler, not as a shock, but as a gentle settling, like the world turning its volume down by a fraction. And as that happens, the body can settle further, too, letting the sensation of heaviness become comfort rather than effort. There is a quiet rhythm in the way the ocean holds its layers, a rhythm that does not resemble music or a beat, but resembles breath in its steadiness. Inhale and exhale stretched across enormous time, a slow exchange of energy that never needs to be forced. The ocean breathes in its own way, through currents and mixing, through slow drifting movement that can take years to complete. And the mind, hearing about that kind of rhythm, naturally begins to slow its own internal pace, matching the idea of long, patient motion. You may find yourself forgetting the sentence you are in, and that is good. You may find yourself drifting away from the meaning, and that is good. You may find yourself waking slightly and then letting go again, and that is good. Nothing is required. The ocean does not care whether you are attentive. The ocean does not care whether you are awake. It continues, and because it continues, you can stop trying to continue yourself. You can simply rest and allow the words to be background, like the soft remainder of sound in deep water. The descent is not a staircase. It is not a path. It is more like a slow dimming, a gradual softening of the mind's need to define. When definitions fade, the mind relaxes. When edges blur, the mind relaxes. When signals become uniform, the mind relaxes. This is why deep water feels so soothing to imagine at night, because it removes the sharpness that keeps you awake. It does not challenge you. It does not demand your participation. It simply provides an environment where participation is optional. If you picture the ocean floor, you might picture it as far away, but you do not need to reach it. You do not need to arrive anywhere. The goal is not the bottom. The goal is the feeling of being held in the middle of something vast, steady, and indifferent to urgency. The ocean is not trying to take you somewhere. It is giving you permission to stop traveling mentally, to stop running ahead, to stop replaying, to stop anticipating. As you drift deeper, the surface becomes a faint idea, like a distant sky you no longer need to see. Any sense of the outside world begins to feel farther away too, not because it is gone, but because it no longer has access to you. The ocean is insulating. It absorbs. It separates you gently from sharp stimuli. It gives you a place where the mind can stop reacting. And when reaction stops, rest begins. This is where the descent becomes almost indistinguishable from stillness. Movement exists, but it is spread so thin across time that it doesn't register as movement. Currents move, but slowly. Water shifts, but subtly. Everything is always changing, but change is so gradual that it feels like continuity. The mind responds to that by letting go of the need to follow, because there is nothing to follow. There is only continuation. You might notice how comforting it is to imagine an environment where nothing is expected. The ocean does not expect you to perform. It does not expect you to understand. It does not expect you to be productive. It does not expect you to stay awake. It simply holds. It simply continues. It simply allows. And because you are allowed, the body can do what it naturally does when it is allowed. Breathing deepens slightly. The space between breaths widens slightly. The tongue rests in the mouth. The forehead smooths. The shoulders sink. The belly softens. The hands release their subtle grip. The legs become heavy. The body becomes more like the ocean itself, stable, slow, and unbothered by time. Sometimes the mind tries to return to the surface, because the surface is familiar, because the surface is where things happen, where signals exist, where attention knows what to do. But if that happens, it can happen gently. The mind can rise briefly and then drift down again, not as a failure, but as part of the same slow movement. A thought can appear and then soften. A memory can flicker and then fade. Nothing is required. Nothing needs to be held. The descent does not depend on perfection. It depends on permission. So you can permit yourself to drift again, without effort, without forcing. You can let the idea of depth return, the idea of uniform quiet, the idea of being surrounded evenly by a calm that does not ask for clarity. You can let the surface become distant again, like a thin, bright concept that no longer matters, while the deeper space remains steady and present. In deep water, there is a certain kind of peace that comes from not having to see. When visibility is low, the mind stops trying to interpret every detail. When details disappear, the mind stops trying to name. When naming stops, thinking softens. The ocean does not punish you for not seeing. It does not demand definition. It invites you to let definition go, because definition is work, and you are here to rest. The descent continues, but it is not a story. It is a state. It is a gradual reduction of stimulation, until even the idea of stimulation feels abstract. It is the slow creation of a space where sleep can happen naturally, because nothing is pulling you back to alertness. The ocean is neutral. The ocean is steady. The ocean is patient, and patience is the simplest path into sleep. If you imagine the current down here, it is not fast. It is not dramatic. It is more like a slow drift that carries warmth and cold, salt and minerals, tiny particles and quiet energy, moving everything gently without ever announcing itself. The current does not hurry. It does not rush to arrive. It does not compete. It simply continues. And that continuation is soothing, because it tells the body that there is no deadline, no urgency, no need to keep pace. The mind can Follow that lesson. It can stop trying to keep pace with anything. It can stop trying to complete. It can stop trying to solve. It can stop trying to plan. It can rest inside the same slow continuation, letting thoughts become softer and fewer, letting attention become heavier and more diffuse, letting the sense of self become less defined, not in a frightening way, but in a restful way, like a drop of water returning to a larger sea. And if you notice that you are still listening, that is fine, because listening is not required. You can listen loosely. You can let the words pass through without catching. You can let the meaning fade. You can allow the voice to become a distant presence, like sound in deep water, absorbed, soft, spread thin. The narration does not need your attention. It is here to accompany you until you no longer need accompaniment. The descent does not end. It simply becomes so gentle that it feels like you are no longer descending at all, only resting inside depth, held evenly, surrounded by a calm that does not change quickly enough to be noticed. And in that steadiness, the mind can stop moving forward and backward, stop scanning and measuring, stop naming and analyzing, and slip naturally into sleep, not as a goal reached, but as a state that was already waiting beneath effort. So you can continue to drift without direction, without distance, without measurement, held by the ocean's quiet structure, carried by its slow patience, surrounded by its even presence, and allowed, completely allowed, to let go. At this depth, pressure is not a threat, and it is not a warning. It is not something that arrives suddenly or tightens without permission. It is simply the ocean being the ocean, the quiet truth of water surrounding you evenly in every direction. The steady presence of weight distributed so completely that it stops feeling like weight and begins to feel like support. Pressure here does not come from one side. It does not push you down or press you inward as if to confine. It exists everywhere at once, equal and constant. A calm embrace that does not change quickly enough to be noticed and does not require you to respond. When pressure is even, the body stops trying to prepare for imbalance. There is no side that feels heavier than another. There is no edge where the environment turns sharp. There is no sudden shift that asks short muscles to correct. In everyday life, you are always adjusting in small ways without realizing it. Keeping yourself upright, keeping yourself ready, holding tension as if it might be needed. But here, the ocean removes that requirement. Here, support does not depend on your effort. It does not depend on your attention. It simply exists, steady and unquestioning. This is one of the deepest comforts of imagining the ocean at night, because the mind is often tired not from thinking itself, but from bracing, from holding, from anticipating, from carrying subtle readiness in the background. Pressure, in its gentle, even form, tells the nervous system that readiness is no longer necessary. It tells the body that it can stop holding itself up. It tells the muscles that there is nothing to fight and nothing to fix. The ocean carries you the way sleep carries you, not with force, but with permission. Support at depth is different from support on land. On land, support comes from below, and the body has to organize itself around gravity. There is always a sense of up and down, a sense of posture, a sense of balancing. But in deep water, support surrounds. It is not a platform, it is a field. It holds from all directions at once, and because it holds from all directions, the mind no longer needs to keep track of direction. Orientation softens. The idea of upright becomes less meaningful. The body can let go of its small, constant corrections. You might notice how this changes breathing. When the body is supported without effort, breath becomes quieter. Not necessarily slower, not forced, not controlled, simply quieter. Because breathing no longer has to coordinate with tension. The chest can soften. The belly can soften. The throat can soften. Each inhale can arrive as if it is simply appearing, and each exhale can leave as if it is simply dissolving, leaving behind more space. The space between breaths can widen gently, and you do not need to do anything to make it happen, because this is what the body does when it feels safe. Safety is often misunderstood. People think safety is the absence of danger, but the nervous system reads safety as predictability, as steadiness, as an environment that does not demand rapid response. That is what deep water provides in the imagination. Not stimulation. Not bright contrast. Not a stream of signals. Only uniformity. Pressure that does not change sharply. Support that does not fail suddenly. Calm that does not require vigilance. The more uniform the environment becomes, the less the mind has to do. It can be calming to remember that pressure is not an added thing. It is simply the result of water existing above water, layer upon layer, held by gravity, resting on itself. There is no aggression in it. It is the ocean's natural state, and when you imagine yourself held within it, you are not being squeezed by something hostile. You are being included in a structure that has always been there, a structure that does not need to react to you. It holds you without noticing you, which is a strange kind of comfort, because it means you do not have to perform for the environment. You do not have to earn support. You do not have to deserve it. It is already there. The mind often carries a habit of scanning. Even when you are tired, part of you still checks the room, checks the future, checks the day, checks the next responsibility. Scanning is effort. It is subtle, but it is effort. In deep water, scanning becomes pointless, because there is nothing to scan. There are no corners, no sudden contrasts, no bright interruptions. The environment is too even, and when scanning becomes pointless, the habit begins to release. The mind stops reaching outward. It begins to sink inward, or perhaps it stops needing an inward at all. Pressure becomes a kind of reassurance. It is the ocean saying, without words, that nothing is changing rapidly here. It is the ocean saying that there are no surprises in this moment. The body likes that. The body relaxes into that. It may not relax instantly, but it relaxes gradually, the way a clenched hand opens slowly when it realizes it no longer needs to hold. Tension leaves in stages. It drains away in small waves. It releases from places you did not know were still holding. The forehead smooths. The jaw loosens. The shoulders sink. The neck softens. The space around the eyes relaxes. The tongue rests. The hands become heavier. You do not need to check whether you are relaxing. You do not need to evaluate. Even evaluation is effort. The ocean does not evaluate. It does not measure. It simply holds. You can allow yourself to be held the same way, letting the body do what it already knows how to do when nothing is demanding its attention. If you imagine the ocean's pressure as a blanket, it is not a blanket you have to pull over yourself. It is already there, surrounding. There is no moment of adjusting it, no moment of arranging it. It simply exists as a uniform presence, thick and calm, spread evenly across everything. That evenness is what allows the mind to stop trying to locate itself. When support is everywhere, you do not need to find it. When support is constant, you do not need to monitor it. When support is reliable, you can forget it. And forgetting support is often the deepest form of rest. In daily life, support is often something you notice only when it becomes uncomfortable. A chair that is too hard, a bed that is too warm, a room that is too noisy. The mind notices irregularity because irregularity might require action. But here, in the imagined depth, irregularity fades. The ocean is a smooth environment. Pressure is uniform. Temperature changes slowly. Sound is muffled. Light is dim. Everything is designed by nature to discourage sudden reaction. This discouragement is a gift. It is the ocean quietly teaching your nervous system that it does not need to react right now. And when reaction stops, the mind stops producing urgency. The mind can still think, but the thoughts lose momentum. They lose sharpness. They become slower and softer. They become less likely to form into plans or worries. A thought might appear and then dissolve before it becomes a problem. A memory might flicker and then fade before it becomes a replay. You can let them do that. You do not need to capture them. You do not need to finish them. The ocean does not finish waves. It lets them rise and fall. It does not hold on to motion. It lets motion pass. Sometimes, the mind will try to check whether it is working. It might ask, am I relaxed yet? Am I sleepy yet? Am I doing this correctly? Those questions are simply the mind's old habit of monitoring. You can let them float by the way you let other thoughts flow by. There is no correct way to drift. There is no right speed. There is only the gradual release of effort as the environment becomes more uniform and the body recognizes that it can let go. Pressure is also a reminder of depth itself. Depth is not an event. Depth is a condition. You are not going deeper in a dramatic way. You are simply allowing the surface to matter less. The more the surface matters less, the more the body settles into the condition of being held. And the more the body settles into being held, the less attention is needed. Pressure does not increase as a story beat. It is simply present, steady, and that steadiness is what makes it soothing. If you imagine your body in this water, you do not need to imagine it moving. You can imagine it resting, suspended, carried. Suspension is a kind of relief because it removes a sense of having to support yourself from within. On land, you are always supporting yourself, even when you lie down, because gravity has direction and the body organizes itself to resist it. In deep water, support is shared. The environment does some of the work. In the imagination, the environment does almost all of the work. And because the environment is doing the work, the body can stop doing it. This is why the idea of pressure can feel comforting rather than intense. It is the ocean saying, you are contained, you are held, you are not slipping, you are not falling, you do not need to catch yourself. There is no edge to fall off of. There is no sudden drop. There is only the steady, even field of support that surrounds you and makes movement unnecessary. And because movement is unnecessary, the mind can stop preparing for it. A lot of wakefulness is preparation. Preparation for the next sound, the next message, the next responsibility, the next thought. But the ocean at depth is not a place where those things matter. It is a place where preparation becomes irrelevant. The mind can release its grip on the future. It can release its grip on the day. It can release its grip on identity and obligation, not by force, but by realizing that none of those things are required here. Even the idea of you can soften, not in a frightening way, in a restful way, because the sense of self is often maintained by constant checking, constant orientation, constant separation from environment. But here, separation fades. The ocean is too uniform for strong boundaries. The body feels less like an object in a space and more like part of a single, continuous field. This can be deeply soothing. It is like being allowed to stop being defined, like being allowed to become simple. The ocean's pressure does not demand that you remain aware of it. In fact, it becomes more soothing as it becomes background. The best kind of support is the kind you can forget, a bed you do not notice, a room that does not require adjustment, a silence that is not perfect, but steady. Pressure at depth becomes that kind of support. It fades into the background until it is no longer a sensation you track, only a condition you rest within. If you notice that you are still listening closely, you can let that soften too. The voice can become background. The words can become texture. Meaning can become optional. You can allow the narration to drift at the edge of awareness, like faint sound in deep water, absorbed, soft, spread thin. Nothing needs to be understood. Nothing needs to be remembered. The ocean does not remember every current. It simply continues. And if a thought tries to rise again, you can let it rise and then let it dissolve. Because pressure reminds you that you are supported even when you let go. You do not fall when you stop thinking. You do not disappear when you stop monitoring. You do not lose anything important when you stop analyzing. The ocean holds you the same way, regardless. Support does not depend on attention, so you can let the body sink into the sensation of being held, even if you do not feel it strongly, even if it is only an idea, because the idea itself is enough to change the nervous system. The body responds to imagined safety. The body responds to imagined steadiness. The body responds to the suggestion of uniform support by releasing tension and widening breath and softening thought. This is why the ocean is such a gentle place for sleep, because it is naturally aligned with the body's desire to stop working. Pressure becomes steady calm. Steady calm becomes background. Background becomes silence. And silence becomes the kind of spaciousness where sleep can arrive without being called. You do not need to invite sleep. You do not need to chase it. You can simply remain held, surrounded evenly by the ocean's quiet support, letting effort drain away in slow waves, letting attention become heavier and more diffuse, letting thoughts slow and soften and thin, until the idea of staying awake no longer makes sense, and the body does what it has always known how to do when it is supported completely. And if you drift off somewhere in the middle of this, that is perfect, because the ocean will continue to hold you, and the voice will continue to soften into the background, and pressure will remain steady and calm, and nothing will demand that you come back, far below the surface, far below anything that reacts quickly. There is movement that does not announce itself as movement. The deep current does not rush, does not surge, does not break. It exists as a slow, continuous drift, spread so widely across time and distance that it feels almost indistinguishable from stillness. This current has no urgency and no destination that matters. It moves because movement is what water does when it has nowhere it needs to be. The deep current is not something you follow. It is something you are already inside. There is no moment when you step into it or decide to let it carry you. It has been there all along, steady and patient, flowing beneath layers of water that change more quickly above. At these depths, nothing competes for attention. There are no sudden shifts in temperature, no sharp changes in direction. Everything unfolds at a pace slow enough for the mind to stop checking what comes next. This kind of movement is deeply reassuring because it removes choice. You do not need to decide whether to go forward or stay where you are. You do not need to orient yourself or adjust your position. The current does not require participation. It carries without pulling, moves without effort, continues without expectation. You are not being taken somewhere. You are being allowed to rest inside motion that does not require awareness. In everyday life, movement often means change, and change often means preparation. But the deep current does not behave that way. It moves without producing events. It shifts without creating moments. Its motion is measured not in seconds or minutes, but in seasons, years, and centuries. Water that drifts here may take decades to complete a path that feels instantaneous in the imagination. This scale of time dissolves urgency completely. When movement is this slow, nothing feels late. Nothing feels unfinished. The body responds to this idea naturally. Muscles remain heavy and loose, no longer anticipating action. The The subtle readiness that usually lives beneath the surface of awareness begins to drain away. Breathing stays slow and even, not because it is controlled, but because there is nothing stimulating enough to speed it up. Each breath blends into the next, without edges, without markers, without the need to be counted. Thoughts behave the same way. In the presence of such slow movement, thinking loses its sharpness. Ideas arrive without momentum. They drift briefly and then fade, carried by the same gentle flow. There is no pressure to finish them, no pressure to understand them. The mind is allowed to be incomplete, and incompleteness feels safe here. The deep current does not divide the ocean into places. It connects everything quietly. It moves warmth and cold, salt and minerals, energy and stillness, redistributing them without drama. Nothing is isolated. Nothing is stranded. Everything participates in the same slow exchange, even if that exchange takes so long that it feels like permanence. This is why imagining the deep ocean can feel so calming at night. It offers movement without stimulation, change without disruption, continuation without demand. The nervous system recognizes this as a place where vigilance is unnecessary. When vigilance is unnecessary, the body can finally rest without holding itself ready. You may notice that your sense of direction is softened further. There is no clear forward motion. There is no backward motion either. The current does not have a front or a back. That matters. It flows in broad arcs shaped by the earth itself, guided by forces too large and too slow to feel personal. Direction becomes abstract, and without direction, the mind no longer needs to locate itself. As awareness continues to thin, even the idea of being carried can fade. The current does not need to be imagined actively. It can remain as a background condition, like gravity or darkness, something that exists without needing attention. The less you think about it, the more effective it becomes. This is the paradox of rest. The less you try to rest, the more rest happens. The deep current is ancient, not because it is old in a human sense, but because it operates on timescales, where beginnings and endings lose meaning. It has flowed through climates that no longer exist, through coastlines that have shifted, through oceans that have changed shape, and yet it remains not as a memory, but as a process that never stopped. This continuity is comforting because it suggests that nothing here depends on individual moments. When the mind senses this kind of continuity, it begins to relax its grip on identity and time. You do not need to know who you are in this moment. You do not need to know what time it is. You do not need to know how long you have been resting. Those questions belong to faster environments. The deep current does not ask them. You might notice that awareness begins to drift in and out, not sharply, not suddenly, but gently, like a slow tide. You may feel present for a moment, and then absent for a moment, and then present again. This is not a problem. This is the natural rhythm of the mind when it is allowed to rest. The current does not judge this movement. It does not require consistency. It carries everything equally. The ocean at this depth does not distinguish between rest and movement. To be carried is to rest. To rest is to move. The usual boundaries dissolve. This is why it becomes easier to let go of the need to stay awake. Staying awake is an effort. Resting is not. When effort dissolves, sleep arrives naturally, without being invited. You do not need to imagine anything clearly now. Images can blur. Sensations can soften. The idea of the ocean can remain only as a feeling of wide, steady continuation. The words can become less important. The voice can become background. Meaning can thin out until it no longer matters. The deep current continues, whether it is named or not. It continues whether it is noticed or not. It continues whether you are awake or asleep. And because it continues regardless, you are free to stop following it consciously. You can let yourself be carried without watching, without listening closely, without holding onto awareness. If the mind tries to return to sharper thinking, you can allow that too. The current will still be there when the thought dissolves. Nothing is lost by drifting. Nothing is missed. There is no critical moment. There is no information you need to stay awake for. This is not a story with a reveal. It is a state you are allowed to sink into. As the deep current moves on, slow and patient, it becomes easier to feel how little effort is required to exist here. The body remains heavy. The breath remains steady. The mind remains loose. Everything important is already being handled by the environment itself. And so you can continue to rest within this movement that feels like stillness. This current that carries without urgency. This deep, quiet flow that does not ask you to go anywhere or be anything at all. You can allow awareness to soften further, allowing sleep to approach gently, knowing that the current will continue to hold you, unchanged, steady, and calm, long after attention has faded completely. At this depth, time no longer behaves the way it does at the surface. It does not move forward in steps or segments. It does not pass in moments that can be counted or measured. It spreads. It settles. It becomes something wide and slow, something that surrounds rather than advances. Deep time in the ocean is not about what comes next. It is about what continues without needing to arrive anywhere. Here, nothing is in a hurry to become something else. Water that rests at this depth may have been here for centuries, moving only slightly, changing only subtly, carried through invisible paths that take generations to complete. This slowness is not inactivity. It is a different scale of existence, one where urgency cannot survive. When time stretches this far, the idea of waiting disappears entirely. The mind is accustomed to time as a sequence, one thing after another, one thought leading to the next, 1 hour giving way to another. But deep ocean time does not follow this pattern. It does not stack moment, it layers them. Everything exists at once in a broad, continuous presence. The past does not feel far away. The future does not feel close. They dissolve into a single, steady now that does not move. This is why imagining deep time can feel so calming. It removes the pressure to keep up. It removes the sense that something is slipping away. Nothing is being lost here. Nothing is running out. There is no deadline. No countdown. No sense of falling behind. Time is not something you are inside of. It is something you are resting within. The body responds to this idea instinctively. Muscles release further when there is no sense of urgency. Breath deepens not because it is guided, but because there is no reason for it to stay shallow. The heart continues its rhythm without adjustment. Everything biological settles into maintenance mode, the quiet state where nothing extra is required. In deep time, repetition is not boring. It is reassuring. The same sensations return gently. The same feelings appear again and again. Softened, familiar, predictable. Predictability is one of the strongest signals of safety for the nervous system. When nothing new is demanded, vigilance fades. When vigilance fades, awareness becomes diffuse. When awareness becomes diffuse, sleep draws closer. You may notice that the idea of how long no longer feels important. You do not need to know how long you have been listening. You do not need to know how long remains. Those questions belong to a faster layer of reality. At this depth, duration is irrelevant. What matters is continuity, and continuity does not need to be tracked. The ocean has existed in this slow state long before there were clocks, calendars, or schedules. It has moved through ice ages and warm ages, through rising seas and falling seas. without ever noticing the difference. Deep water carries memory, but not in the way the mind does. It carries memory as chemistry, as temperature, as motion so slow it feels eternal. When you imagine yourself resting within this deep time, you are not imagining a pause. You are imagining participation in something that does not pause, because it never rushes. There is no start signal. There is no end signal. There is only continuation, gentle and uninterrupted. Thoughts that arise here tend to lose their edges. They do not sharpen into plans. They do not form into worries. They appear briefly, softened by the surrounding stillness, and then dissolve back into the background. You do not need to finish them. You do not need to understand them. In deep time, incomplete thoughts are perfectly natural. Even the sense of self can begin to blur slightly, not disappear, but soften. Identity is often maintained by reference to time. What you did earlier, what you will do later. When those references lose importance, the self becomes quieter, lighter, less defined. This is not a loss. Ease, relief. Deep time does not judge whether you are awake or asleep. It does not reward attention or punish distraction. It continues whether you are aware of it or not. This makes it a perfect environment for rest, because it does not require participation. You can drift in and out of awareness without consequence. You might find that moments of absence begin to appear, small gaps where you are not fully thinking, not fully listening, not fully aware. These gaps are signs that the mind is beginning to rest. You do not need to fill them. You do not need to hold on to consciousness. You can let these spaces widen naturally. At this depth, nothing important happens quickly. And because nothing important happens quickly, nothing important is missed when attention fades. This allows the mind to stop guarding itself against loss. You are not going to miss an alarm here. You are not going to miss a turning point. There is no sudden shift that requires you to be alert. The ocean's deep time invites you to stop measuring yourself against progress. You do not need to be improving. You do not need to be moving forward. You do not need to be achieving rest in a particular way. Rest happens on its own when effort is removed. Deep time removes effort by making effort unnecessary. If the mind tries to return to surface time, thinking about tomorrow, about earlier, about something unfinished, you can allow those thoughts to pass through without resistance. Resistance is effort. Letting pass is not. The deep ocean does not resist currents. It absorbs them, spreads them, softens them until they no longer feel like movement. As time continues to stretch and widen, it becomes easier to forget that you were ever tracking it. Forgetting time is one of the gentlest gateways to sleep. Sleep does not arrive on schedule. It arrives when time no longer matters. You do not need to stay present for this. You do not need to remember this. You do not need to hold on to the idea of deep time. The body understands it intuitively. The nervous system recognizes the absence of urgency and responds by powering down gently, layer by layer. Deep time feels like being allowed to stop, not stop breathing, not stop existing, but stop striving, stop monitoring, stop anticipating, stop narrating. When narration fades, silence grows. When silence grows, rest deepens. The ocean below does not ask you to witness its age. It does not display its history. It simply continues, steady and unconcerned. You are free to match that attitude. You do not need to mark this moment. You do not need to name it. You do not need to remember it later. As awareness thins further, the words themselves can soften into rhythm. Meaning can loosen. The voice can blend into the background like sound filtered through deep water. You can allow yourself to drift between listening and not listening, between presence and absence. Deep time molds everything without urgency. It holds you the same way. There is nothing you need to do to remain here. There is nothing you need to maintain. The environment is doing the work. The ocean is doing the holding. Time is doing the slowing. And as this wide, quiet sense of time continues to surround you, it becomes natural to let go of the effort to stay awake, allowing sleep to arrive gently, without being summoned, without being noticed. Settling in the same way deep water settles, slow, steady, and complete. At this point, there's no need to go deeper. Depth is already everywhere. What begins to change now is not location, but clarity. Awareness itself starts to soften, not suddenly, not completely, but gently, like light fading underwater as distance increases. Nothing disappears all at once. Edges simply lose their sharpness. The ocean here does not feel vast anymore. Vastness requires contrast. It requires comparison. At these days, comparison fades. There's no reference point left to measure against. Space feels uniform, continuous, smooth. The sense of being surrounded becomes less noticeable, not because it is gone, but because it no longer needs attention. Breathing continues, but it may feel farther away, as if it belongs to the background rather than the foreground of experience. You do not need to follow it. You do not need to notice its rhythm. The body knows how to breathe without being watched. The same is true for rest. It does not need supervision. Thoughts now arrive more like echoes than statements. They may appear incomplete, fragmented, or strangely distant, as if they are happening somewhere nearby but not directly to you. This is a natural sign of settling. The mind is no longer organizing itself around language or structure. It is beginning to drift into a more diffuse state where meaning is optional. You might notice moments where attention fades almost entirely, where there's a brief blankness, a soft pause, and then a return. These pauses do not need to be corrected. They do not need to be held open. They are doorways. The mind moves through naturally as it transitions towards sleep. Each pause makes the next one easier. The ocean does not resist this fading. It does not try to keep anything sharp. Sound is absorbed. Motion is absorbed. Even the idea of motion becomes less clear. The deep water feels thick, not in a heavy way, but in a quiet way, like everything is gently slowed by the same invisible softness. At this stage, the idea of listening can relax. The voice does not need to be followed word by word. It can wash over you without forming images, without forming understanding. You are allowed to miss parts. You are allowed to forget what was just said. Forgetting is not failure here. Forgetting is progress. The body continues to release tension in subtle places. Small muscles that were still holding finally let go. The space behind the eyes softens. The tongue rests fully. The jaw hangs just enough to remove effort. Even the hands and feet, which often stay slightly alert, become heavier and less defined. There is no longer a sense of waiting for sleep. Waiting implies expectation. Expectation implies effort. Instead, there is simply allowance. Whatever happens next does not need to be guided. The ocean does not guide itself. It continues because continuation is its nature. Time at this stage is barely perceptible. Not slow, not fast, just irrelevant. You may not know how long you've been here. You may not care. The idea of duration has lost its usefulness. What matters now is only the absence of demand. If awareness returns briefly, it does so softly, without urgency. There is no need to re-engage. No need to refocus. No need to hold on. You can let awareness come and go like a faint tide, rising and falling without consequence. The environment feels stable enough that vigilance is no longer necessary. Nothing is going to change suddenly. Nothing is going to interrupt. Nothing is going to ask you to respond. This certainty, even if it is only imagined, is enough for the nervous system to release its final layers of alertness. The ocean here feels less like a place and more like a condition. A condition of softness, of continuity, of quiet persistence. You are not inside it as much as you are part of it. The boundary between observer and environment grows thin, then thinner still. At some point, the words may stop registering entirely. They may turn into tone, into rhythm, into something that exists without needing interpretation. This is ideal. Meaning is no longer required. Understanding is no longer useful. Rest does not come from comprehension. It comes from surrendering the need to comprehend. You do not need to stay with the voice. You do not need to stay with the ocean. You do not need to stay with anything at all. Staying implies effort. Drifting does not. And so, as awareness continues to dissolve gently, as attention becomes lighter and less defined, you can allow yourself to slip naturally into whatever state comes next, knowing that nothing important is being missed, nothing needs to be remembered, and nothing needs to be held on to. The ocean remains steady. The body remains supported. The mind becomes quiet enough to disappear for a while, and in that disappearance, rest deepens, effortlessly, completely, just as it is meant to. There is very little left to do now, not because something has been completed, but because doing has slowly lost its purpose. The ocean no longer feels deep or wide or ancient. Those ideas belong to earlier layers of awareness. What remains now is something simpler, a quiet continuity, a sense that nothing needs to change. Sound feels farther away, not muted exactly, just less important. The voice drifts without asking to be followed. Words arrive without urgency and leave without needing to be remembered. Meaning loosens its grip. Attention softens around the edges, spreading thin, no longer centered anywhere in particular. Breathing continues on its own. You do not need to notice it. The body has already settled into a rhythm that does not require observation. Each breath blends into the next, without a clear beginning or end, like the slow rise and fall of something far below the surface. The ocean at this stage feels almost abstract, not an image, not a place, but a condition, a steady, uninterrupted calm that does not draw attention to itself. You are not inside it. You are not separate from it. The distinction is no longer useful. Thoughts, if they appear, are faint and incomplete. They do not form sentences. They do not ask questions. They do not lead anywhere. They drift through like soft shadows and dissolve before they can take shape. You do not need to push them away. You do not need to follow them. They fade on their own. Awareness itself becomes optional. You may notice brief moments where there is nothing at all. No image, no sound, no thought. Just a soft blankness. These moments do not need to be held open. They come and go naturally, each one making the next feel easier, more familiar. Time is no longer something you are inside of. It does not stretch or slow. It simply stops being relevant. There is no sense of how long you have been here. There is no curiosity about what comes next. The idea of sequence is gently dissolved. The body feels heavier, but not weighed down. Heavy in the way rest feels heavy, in the way stillness settles when nothing is being held up anymore. Muscles remain loose. The face is smooth. The jaw rests. The eyes are completely at ease. even behind closed lids. Listening can fade now. The voice can become texture, rhythm, something like distant water moving through darkness. You do not need to catch every word. You do not need to stay connected. Drifting away is exactly what this space allows. The ocean does not notice whether you are awake or asleep. It does not change its behavior. It remains steady, quiet, unchanged. This steadiness is what makes letting go feel safe. Nothing depends on your awareness. Nothing will be disrupted by your absence. If consciousness thins further, you do not need to return. There is no instruction to follow, no story to complete, no moment you need to be present for. The environment is stable enough to hold you without supervision. You may feel as if you are floating between states, not fully awake, not clearly asleep. This is not a place to stay. It is a place to pass through, and passing through does not require effort. The ocean remains calm. The body remains supported. The mind no longer needs to narrate. Everything that needed to slow has already slowed. Everything that needed to soften has already softened. And so you can allow awareness to fade naturally, without marking the moment, without noticing the transition, letting sleep arrive quietly, the same way deep water settles, without sound, without signal, without interruption. There is nothing left to arrive at now. Not because something is finished, but because the idea of arrival has slowly dissolved. The ocean does not feel close or distant. It no longer feels like a place at all. It feels like a condition that remains steady, whether it is noticed or not. The voice is still here, but it does not need attention. Words stretch out, growing softer, less defined, less important. They do not ask to be followed. They do not ask to be understood. They exist only as a gentle presence, thinning naturally as silence grows around them. Breathing continues quietly, entirely on its own. There's no need to notice the inhale. No need to notice the exhale. The body is already settled into a rhythm that does not require awareness. Each breath blends into the next, without edges, without markers, without interruption. The body remains supported everywhere. There is no point of tension left to release. No place that needs adjustment. Weight feels evenly distributed. Not heavy, not light, simply settled. Muscles rest without instruction. The face is smooth. The jaw hangs comfortably. The eyes are fully at ease. Thought no longer needs to form. If a fragment appears, it fades before it becomes complete. There is no narrative, no internal commentary, no need to respond to anything. The mind has nothing left to organize, nothing left to prepare for. Time has lost all usefulness here. There is no sense of before or after. No sense of how long this has been happening. No sense of how long it will continue. Duration has stretched so wide that it no longer feels like movement. It feels like stillness. The ocean does not announce endings. It does not close doors. It does not signal completion. It remains exactly as it is, steady and unchanged, allowing awareness to drift away without consequence. Nothing depends on your attention. Nothing is altered by your absence. Listening can fade completely now. The voice can become part of the background, then part of the quiet, then something you no longer notice at all. You do not need to stay connected. You do not need to remain present. Drifting away is natural here. If awareness disappears entirely, there is nothing to return to. If it lingers softly for a moment longer, that is fine too. There is no correct timing, no correct depth, no final moment that needs to be reached or recognized. The environment remains calm. The body remains held. The mind is free to rest without supervision. And so you can let go now, without deciding to, without noticing it happen, allowing sleep to take over, Gently, quietly, completely. The same way deep water settles into darkness, unchanged, unhurried, whole.
you.